Welcome to Tea with Amber. I'm so happy you're all here. Um, uh, my screen is completely blank, but we're not going to let that stop us as long as you can see me and hear me. So let me just check. Aha, good. So, my friends, I arrive here with a heavy, heavy heart, as many of you are feeling. Since our last Tea with Amber, just 7 days ago, our world here in the United States has erupted. A firestorm has swept through. We're experiencing the breaking down of a system. This is a heavy, heavy time, and the heartbreak comes through an image of a man lying there on the streets of Minneapolis by the name of George Floyd, pleading for his life as a white policeman holds him in a chokehold, his knee on him. What struck me about that image was the casualness in which the policeman held that moment. His hands were in his pocket. His expression was one of cool, calm, cruel callousness. And George Floyd cried out, "I can't breathe. I don't want to die. Mama, Mama." The two most precious things in our life, our ability to breathe and our love for our mother, taken away from this man because of the color of his skin. We have come to a time of reckoning. We have come to a time of awakening. We are all being asked to wake up and step out of the trance of conditioning, of enslavement, of a system that was never designed to support and nourish those of us that it has deemed marginalized. We are now each called to walk through our stories, the stories of our shame, the stories of our grief, the stories of our remorse, the stories of the ways in which we have been careless and thoughtless and cruel and unkind, the stories of our silencing. We are being called now to meet our pain in a way that we have perhaps never had to meet our pain, this time together. To look at our pain, to not run away from it, not to hide, not to deny it, not to distract it, not to pretend that it isn't there, but to meet it and know that it is there and we are feeling it. Because in that moment, when we stand deeply and truthfully and authentically in our pain, we transform. Our pain will not kill us. And if we have the brave heart, the vulnerable heart, the capacity to meet it, we will find in meeting our pain the healing that we are seeking. And we're called right now to just recognize, I lost my thought, forgive me, I'm just going to see, where was I? Yes, we're called to see with clear eyes, to see with clear eyes, which means to drop the veils, the ways in which we really have chosen to live in a place of fantasy. I know I have. I know I can live easily in a bubble and keep the world out. I know that. But now we are being asked to see with clear eyes, not to ignore what's going on, to call it, to name it. Because once we name something, it exists. So, dear friends, we are in a painful time, but let us remind ourselves that in the midst of that pain, there is a sense of transformation, an alchemy, a magic that can happen if we hold each other through this time and keep our faith and see with those clear eyes. I came across this beautiful reflection by Theodore Roethke, the American poet. Let me read it to you. It's called In a Dark Time. In a dark time, the eye begins to see. I meet my shadow in the deepening shade. I hear my echo in the echoing wood. What's madness but nobility of soul at odds with circumstance? The day's on fire. I know the purity of despair. My shadow pinned against a sweating wall, that place among the rocks. Is it a cave or a winding path? The edge is what I have. In a Dark Time by Theodore Roethke. The edge is what we all have now. This time of the crossroads, this time of standing on the edge of an abyss, a chasm. Which way are we going to move? James Baldwin says, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed unless it is faced. Let me read it again. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed unless it is faced. And that is what this time is calling of us. To face our stories, to face ourselves, to ask ourselves the deeper questions. So this week, I also have been exploring, looking at my story as a woman of color, going back to the origin of the story. And I just wanted to share a few highlights of my personal journey, since many of you don't know me. I was born in Uganda, East Africa, land of the source of the Nile, a country on the equator, a landlocked country. I was born into a world of privilege and affluence. My mother and father, Karam and Asha, were Indian from northern India. and they were both lawyers, barristers. My mother was the first Indian woman to become a barrister in all of East Africa. So I came from a wonderful, educated, intelligent, affluent, progressive, kind family, for which I am always deeply grateful. But I was, as a child, this was the 1950s, growing up in a Uganda where the British ruled. And I remember as a child being very clear that there were three colors in the world. And I saw everything outside the gates of our house through the lens of color. I was aware at that young age that the white rulers were at the top of the pyramid, the British. At the bottom were the indigenous Africans. And in the middle, sandwiched in between, were the brown skinned ones, those of us who had come from India and settled in the country as part of our diaspora. And as a little girl, I remember being fascinated, especially by the white women, as they would drive by in their cars, as they would walk down the streets, clutching their handbags, permed hair, Doris Day glasses, sunglasses. They had such confidence. And I looked on them as gods. By the time I was 10 years old, the situation in Uganda had become very volatile. The country was preparing for independence. There were soldiers in the street, machete attacks, whisperings of tribal uprisings. The city I lived in was no longer safe. So Karo and Asha, my parents, reluctantly made the decision to send me and my three siblings, brothers and sisters, out of the country for our safety and our education. I arrived in the land of the gods. I arrived at a school nestled in the English countryside, a private elite English boarding school for girls. I was the first Indian student, brown-skinned child, to attend the school in its entire 50-year history. I remember one of the first questions that was asked of me was, "Do you eat with a knife and fork?" Another question was, "Do you live in trees?" And another, "Are you a cannibal?" Those questions humiliated me. I didn't know what to do with them. To them, I was just a brown-skinned little Indian girl from Africa. I was quickly put into elocution classes where I was stripped of my ululating Ugandan accent and instead was taught to speak and enunciate every word with a very crisp upper crust British accent, which I to this day carry. I remember so much wanting to belong, to be one of them. In times of great homesickness, I would look at the mirror and wish I had been born with porcelain skin, pretty twinkly blue eyes, and an upturned nose. Instead, I was this gawky Punjabi girl with my strong features, my black hair, my brown skin. There were times I was spat on by the townsfolk. I was many times told to go back home. And I carried that humiliation as one does when you are not welcomed, when you do not belong. And you learn to keep it quiet. You learn to protect yourself. You learn to create an armor. And you learn to be extremely adaptable. You move into all situations with an ease. But as every adolescent, I grappled with the question, who am I? But added to that question was the angst of a confused identity. Am I British? Am I Indian? Am I African? Who am I? Those questions, really, I struggled with those questions. They made it a very difficult journey for me because, in a way, I didn't belong to any of them. By the time I graduated from Ashford School, I returned to Uganda. I wanted to be home with my mother and father, to get a glimmer into Indian culture. But even there, I didn't belong. I went to university there, the undergraduate school there, Makerere University, considered the Harvard of Africa, amazing education. 90% of the students were Black Africans. Wonderful, wonderful, intelligent time. But I didn't belong there. And then suddenly, 2 years later, just the year I graduated, the president of the country announced on the radio that he wanted all people of Indian origin, the brown skinned ones, to leave his country in 90 days or we'd be shot on sight. And so there it was. In that moment, I felt exiled, as did my family, as did all of us who had brown skin. I'd become a global nomad, impoverished. In that year, we lost everything. My father died, the house in Uganda had gone, our possessions had been looted, we had nothing. So that brought me to the shores of America, the United States. I was about to go to graduate school here when I was 23. And I remember asking myself, is this place called the United States with so much promise, with its Statue of Liberty, with its brand of land of opportunity, welcoming all people of the world, will this be a place that I will belong? And indeed, over the past 50 years, I can't believe I've lived here that long, I have created a wonderful sense of belonging. I got married to a wonderful man from Connecticut. I have two beautiful daughters. I have lived in some lovely, lovely places. And I have been quietly on the quest to understand what belonging meant to me. One day, early on in undergraduate school, I came across two words. Those two words saved me because suddenly I didn't have to worry that my skin color was going to be the doorway into belonging. That in fact, and the two words were global citizen. Ah, the relief. I had discovered a way of being in the world where I did not have to rely on anthems and national boundaries and borders and patriotic songs. I didn't have to do any of that. I was a global citizen. I could move freely beyond borders, outside of borders. That was who I felt I was. And so that gave me a way to move in the world. At the heart of the journey is that question for all of us, that question that is core and essential. Do I belong? Where do I belong? Am I valued in my belonging? Am I welcomed in my belonging? So, on my journey over the past years, as I went into the search for belonging, I discovered I belonged to my family, to my daughters, to my community, to my friends. I belong to Mother Earth. I belong to the river that I sing to every week. I belong to the trees. I belong to the sky. I belong to Mother. And then the greatest of all belongings, I belong to life. I don't have to search anymore. I belong to life. But George Floyd didn't belong to life. His life was taken away from him. The iconic message of that moment, that heartbreak moment, was you don't belong. You are not worthy. You are you have no value. You, George Floyd, are dispensable. We can destroy you. You are not welcome. I can't breathe. Mama, mama. And in that iconic message, which went around the world instantly and erupted protests, riots in this country, that iconic moment, that image that will sear itself through our hearts, we have that sense that the message really is from the dominant story, the dominant narrative, the dominant culture. No matter what you do, no matter who you are, no matter what your accomplishments are, you are forever exiled by the color of your skin. And the lament of people of color and the oppressed all over the world is see me, meet me, listen to me, embrace me, welcome me. Just before I came on the call, I received this extraordinary poem written by a man called Zung Wu. He's a pediatrician and an author of A Mindful Teen. It was excerpted in Cosmos magazine online, and I want to read it to you. It's called A Poem for Our Times. I can't breathe, said George Floyd, the knee of 400 years of racism on his neck. I can't breathe, said the woman, with fear in her eyes, her lungs attacked by coronavirus as she was put onto the ventilator. I can't breathe, said the nurse, exhausted after a long shift, sweating under a hot surgical mask and foggy goggles. I can't breathe, said the young man, poisoned by a toxic drug supply and generations of trauma and loss. I can't breathe, said the 100,000 dead Americans, a nation and a world in mourning. I can't breathe, said cities choked in smoke from a planet on fire. Breathe, my dear, said the Buddha of our time, reminding us of the way to love, healing, and transformation. Breathe, my dear, said the beloved community, grieving and waking up together. Breathe, my dear, said Mother Earth, and let my oceans, mountains, and forests embrace you. Right now, when it seems so hard just to breathe, right now, just breathe. That is a very profound call for all of us as we go through this time, feeling the rage, the fury, the sense of bewilderment, the sense of chaos, confusion, the darkness that is there. In the midst of that, it is to breathe and breathe deeply and deeply some more. For life has not abandoned us. Arundhati Roy has this reflection. To love, to be loved, to never forget your own insignificance, to never get used to the unspeakable violence and the vulgar disparity of life around you, to seek joy in the saddest places, to pursue beauty to its lair, to never simplify what is complicated or complicate what is simple, to respect strength, never power. Above all, to watch, to try and understand, to never look away, and never, never to forget. Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. So, my friends, today's Tea with Amber is a heavy-hearted tea. I was actually, last week I left feeling very light, and I was going to be offering something on visioning the new story today, some beautiful reflections. And then this moment showed up, and I wanted to respect deeply and honor what has happened in our country. So even in those saddest moments, seek joy, find beauty in its lair. May you be kind to yourself and to each other. May you go walk in the woods, walk in nature and feel the breezes. May you know deeply that you belong, you are welcomed, that life is not here to punish you, but to celebrate and honor you. Thank you so much for coming to my Tea with Amber. Take care.